Good morning, Mark Sutton with HurricaneTrack.com here with your hurricane outlook and discussion for Tuesday, the 19th of September, 2017. Jose, spreading out just like I told you it would, and it's not like I figured that out all by myself. The Hurricane Center talked about this. The wind field would expand. I mentioned the fact that it would expand, like I said in one of my analogies, like a kid's bouncy house. When you let the air out of it, it collapses and it spreads out on the ground, and that's what's happening here with Jose. Very small area of hurricane force winds near the center, and that would be confined to any convection that happens to fire up. But otherwise, it's a very large wind field spread out over a huge area, and as such, tropical storm warnings and watches in effect for portions of New England, eastern Long Island, and this will be going on for the next several days, so expect rough surf conditions, chewing away at the beaches. Kind of unpleasant, but not a real problem as long as you use common sense. Looking at the wide satellite picture this morning, this is the bottom portion, the southern part of Jose moving away out of the satellite shot. This is Category 5 once again, Hurricane Maria, and look at that giant band coming around the east side here. The central dense overcast right in the middle, and there's that very warm eye, and you can see it kind of wobbling around as it gets bounced around inside this big ball of energy. This is going to be a devastating event for portions of the British U.S. Virgin Islands, perhaps eastern Puerto Rico, Calabro, Vieques, etc. We're going to investigate that just a little bit more in a moment. A close-up, uncolorized. This is just your black and white imagery showing you the very well-defined circulation with this system. And again, look at that, just incredible band right there developing, really bringing in the energy to this system. The central dense overcast, you can see it very well developed right in there. And then the warm spot of the eye showing up. So for you folks with concerns, very, very warranted concerns, let's look at the different areas. St. Kitts and Nevis, and up here towards Anguilla and St. Martin and St. Bart's right here. All of these areas, with the exception, I think this is Montserrat right here, if I'm not mistaken. So the core is going to pass to the south and west of these islands up here. So St. Kitts, Nevis, or Nevis, however you say it, and the islands up here of Anguilla, and again St. Martin and St. Bartolome. This area right through here, I deem you safe from the core of this powerful, powerful hurricane. Over here, I can't say that yet for obvious reasons, and certainly not for Puerto Rico. But I want to point out something, with all this doom and gloom, and it's definitely warranted to talk about how serious this is. But I'm going to show you something in a minute to just kind of temper that. And we have to remember to balance the, and it's very warranted here, the hype and the warning, the loud bullhorn of how dangerous this is with very sound science, so people understand what they're up against and what they're not up against. And I'll explain what that means in a moment. The 5-day forecast, for the most part, brings it out of the islands and then curves it seemingly away from the United States eventually, is what you could infer. Maybe it's going to turn out. And to that I say, probably at this point that's what's going to happen. The modeling is indicating that for the most part, if not 100%. But we know how things can change, and this is 5 days out, and the average track error is over 200 miles at that point in time. And so you just never know. Remember Irma? And I'm not saying that this is going to change and come down to South Florida or anything crazy. And you remember last year with Matthew, it looked like it was going to turn out, and it edged ever closer, and we know how things go. So it's not a done deal that this does not hit the southeast coast, and it's not a done deal that it will. So we'll see. All right, so let me show you what I'm talking about here. We're all very aware of how dangerous a situation this is. Catastrophic, Category 5, massive wind energy, And the force of that, very devastating, especially to any high rises. We definitely know by now when you hear Category 5, you run for the hills, so to speak. Maybe not necessarily the hills, but you certainly get away from the water. But I want to temper this with some information so people understand that the entire hurricane is not packing 160 mile per hour winds. So the maximum sustained winds are near 160, and those winds are sampled by the recon planes that fly in there, or through dropsondes that they let go out of a chute in the bottom of the plane. These are propeller planes, believe it or not. And those dropsondes fall through the atmosphere, and they measure the wind speed, and some of it's instantaneous. They're not sticking an anemometer out there like we have in a fixed position, and so they're using mathematics, probably trigonometry, and GPS information, very high resolution, high frequency data to get this information. And these are spot check wind speeds. The planes are tiny, tiny features in the hurricane, and things change every single second. And so I'm not saying that it's not a Category 5. I'm saying it's not 160 mile per hour winds all around that satellite picture. And we're going to go back to it in just a moment. And then, the message here is that it'll remain an extremely dangerous Cat 4 or 5 while it approaches the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. And that's what's so important here. But also, if there's any good news, it's this right here. And this is what I'm talking about. The hurricane force winds extend outward up to 30 miles from the center. So that's not a very large area of hurricane force winds. And hurricane force winds are 74 miles per hour or greater. And so if we go back and we look at the satellite picture, I can try to demonstrate this and explain it. The hurricane force winds are going to be occurring. Let's go to a still image. That'll be a lot more easy to explain. Let's see. I think there's enough daylight out there in that part of the world. Indeed, there is. So looking at the visible satellite shot, 30 miles from the center, maybe something like this is your hurricane force wind area. That's probably pretty accurate. And only in certain locations where very intense convection pops up, and it's impossible to know when that's going to happen, will you get these 160 mile per hour winds. And so what I'm saying, not everybody in this entire circle in here, and certainly not out here, is experiencing a Category 5 hurricane. The good news is the Category 5 hurricane is somewhere in this area. Now, that area, that donut, if you will, could easily pass over here, St. Croix. It could pass over portions of Puerto Rico, right? We know that. It could pass over some of these islands. St. Thomas up here, and the British Virgin Islands, right? We know that. But I just want to kind of balance the whole, like I said, bullhorn of how frightening and deadly and dangerous this is, which is absolutely true. And people in Dominica down here know that all too well. And folks up here, Barbuda, and through this area where Irma passed, know it all too well. Irma had a larger wind field. This is a smaller wind field, thank goodness. So, I'm just trying to be real and not say that the entire hurricane, it gets hyperbolic, as they say, if you say that the thing is absolutely catastrophic, it's historic, whatever. That's for the record books, but the reality is only where that core passes. And luckily, and this is the good news, I'm trying to emphasize this a little bit here, the good news is it is not a giant core that's going to devastate a 100-mile area either side of the eye. Katrina had a much larger wind field. It was approaching the Gulf Coast, and it's a different animal altogether, and it had this huge storm surge, 25 to 30 feet in some areas. And it weakened from a Category 5 out over the open Gulf down to a Category 3 wind-wise, but it produced this extremely potent storm surge. And so my other point, we're focused on the wind here around that core, but we need to remember all the rainfall that's going to be headed for this area, regardless of where the core passes. And the rainfall could be catastrophic in of itself. And with that, I don't have any good news, except we don't know exactly how much rain will fall everywhere, and therefore you better be prepared. You cannot be near streams, rivers, valleys, etc., that are going to fill up with torrential, absolutely stunning rainfall rates, and that's coming up soon as these bands move in. You can't mess around with that at all right? So I just wanted to, I was thinking about what I was saying all day yesterday and how dangerous. Is there any good news in this at all? And I thought, well, you know what, there really is, and that's about the core and how relatively small it is. So real quick, in terms of the future of Maria, most of the modeling shows this parabolic curve away from the United States. But like I said, we know how that can change. You know, if you shift this west just a couple hundred miles, then the curve could be right off the East Coast. You just never know. A lot of it has to do with Jose and how much ridging is able to come over the top. And either, there's enough and this comes in like Hugo did, as an example, or it does this gentle curve. It's just, I try not to be too eager to sound like, yes, I want to go to the coast and intercept a hurricane, but I have a hard time believing, after Irma especially, that the GFS and the Euro are all of a sudden going to be right in their track guidance 8 or 9 days out, and it's not going to waver by more than 1 or 2 degrees of longitude. You follow me? Do you have a hard time believing that that's going to be the case? And again, it's not wishful thinking, because I do not want people's lives devastated and ruined and people dead. Of course not. But if it's going to hit, you bet I want to be there. And I've talked about that before. So I look at this and I go, really? Is the modeling just all of a sudden, quote unquote, fixed? And we're not going to have any adjustments major one way or the other? You remember, like I said, with Matthew last year, and of course recently with Irma. So just, be aware of that. Maybe it's absolutely going to be correct this time that it's a fairly easy pattern. Maybe it's not. That's why there is uncertainty. All right, well, that's all I've got for the morning. This is the morning update. I'll have another one in the afternoon, late afternoon after the 5 p.m. advisory package. So folks down in the Caribbean, Virgin Islands, and Puerto Rico, you are up next. And just prepare, use common sense, and make sure you're away from any place that's going to flash flood, because some of that is absolutely going to be terrifying and epic in proportion when you're talking about 2 feet of rain across some of that area where there is some serious terrain to deal with. Yuck. Yuck, yuck, yuck. I feel bad for the people that are going to be impacted. I really do. So like I said, that's it for now. We'll see what the modeling shows in terms of the future. We will watch Maria during the day, and then I'll have more on it after the 5 p.m. advisory. I am Mark Sudduth for HurricaneTrack.com as always. Thank you for tuning in and listening to me, and I'll speak at you some more later today.